This happened when I was 23. I was in that stretch of life that feels like standing in a hallway with all the doors closed. I just dropped out of my second year of college, moved back to my parents' house in rural Kansas, and I was doing everything I could avoid thinking about how badly I'd let myself down. Camping had always been my escape. It was the one thing that made me feel like I was still in control of something. I still think about this trip. Not every day anymore, but enough. It changed the way I sleep. It changed the way I hear silence. And I've never gone back to that forest. Not once. It was mid-October. I drove out to Ozark National Forest in northwest Arkansas, a stretch I'd done twice before but never alone. I parked at the Redding Campground trailhead off Highway 21 and hiked in about 4 miles to a backcountry site I'd used before, flat ground, decent drainage, close enough to a creek that I could hear the water at night. The weather was cold but dry, low 40s by dark. I had a 3-season tent, a sleeping bag rated 20 degrees, a headlamp, maybe 3 days of food, and a small camp stove. I got in around 4 in the afternoon. Plenty of time to set up before dark. The trail had been empty the entire way in. No other cars at the trailhead when I parked. No voices, no distant fires, nothing. Just orange leaves and the sound of the creek somewhere below the ridge. I felt good. That's the part one want you to understand. I felt genuinely peaceful for the first time in months. I set up my tent on a flat patch of ground between 2 large oaks, got my stove going 8, and was in my sleeping bag by 9. I read for maybe 20 minutes. Then I turned off my headlamp and went to sleep. The creek sounded like static. Wind moved through the trees in long, slow waves. I was out fast. I woke up at some point in the middle of the night. Not startled. More like my body just decided it was done sleeping. I lay there in the dark and listened. Creek, wind, the occasional tick of a branch somewhere, and then something else. Breathing, low, slow, rhythmic, coming from the foot of my sleeping bag. I froze. My first thought was, I'm still half asleep. My own breathing is echoing in the tent fabric. That happens. I control my breath, held it for a few seconds. The other breathing didn't stop. It didn't even shift. I told myself it was an animal sniffing around outside. A deer, raccoon, maybe a dog that had wandered from somewhere. The sound was close, but sound travels weird in a tent. It could have been outside. I clicked on my headlamp, swept the tent. Empty. Just my gear, my pack, my boots near the door. The breathing had stopped the moment the light came on. I lay there for a while longer, light on, listening. Nothing. I told myself I'd been half dreaming. I turned off the lamp and went back to sleep. Or I tried to. The second thing happened just before dawn. I woke again to find my tent zipper had been opened. Not all the way, maybe 8 inches. Just enough for a gap. Cold air was coming through. I was certain I had zipped it fully the night before. I always do. It's habit. The kind of thing you do without thinking after enough camping trips. I sat up, looked at the gap. The mesh inner layer was still closed and zipped. Just the outer fly had been opened. I told myself it must have been a zipper failure. Cheap hardware, thermal contraction, in the cold. It happens. I zipped it back up, checked the mesh, lay back down. The sky outside was going gray. Maybe an hour from sunrise. I didn't sleep again. When I got up and stepped outside, the frost on the ground showed my boot prints from the night before, walking from my car to my campsite. That was normal. What wasn't normal was a second set of prints, smaller than mine, barefoot, or at least in smooth-soled shoes with no tread at all. They came from the tree line to the east, circled my tent completely, and went back into the trees. I stood there and looked at those prints for a long time. They weren't mine. I was wearing trail boots with deep lug soles. These were different. They walked a full, deliberate circle around my tent, close enough that whoever made them could touch the fabric, and then just walked back into the darkness of the trees. I didn't hike out. I should have. But I told myself it was another hiker from a nearby campsite, just curious. I made coffee. I tried to be rational about it. I spent the day on the trail, got back to camp at dusk, ate, and got into my tent before dark. That was a mistake. Around 2 in the morning, I woke to the sound of my tent pole snapping. The whole right side of the tent collapsed onto me. Something was pressing on it from outside. Hard, heavy, moving. I yelled. I grabbed my headlamp and shoved at the collapsed fabric. The pressure didn't let up. I screamed again, pure panic. No words. I could hear something outside. Not breathing this time. Moving. Circling. The tent shifted as I fought inside it. The fabric wrapping around my legs. I couldn't find the zipper. My headlamp was blinding me against the tent wall. I just heard movement, fast movement. And then my hand found the zipper pull. And I tore it open, and I fell out into the dark. Nothing there. Silence. Wind in the trees. The creek. My own breathing ragged, loud, wrong. I stood in the dark with a headlamp and a tent pole that had been snapped cleanly in half. Not bent. Snapped. I didn't think. I just moved. I grabbed my pack, my headlamp, my car keys. I left the tent. I left the stove. I left everything else. I hiked out 4 miles in the dark, headlamp bouncing on the trail, not looking back. I kept hearing movement in the trees on both sides of the trail, parallel to me, keeping pace. Maybe it was just the wind. Maybe it was just the way the forest sounds at night when you're terrified. I hit the trailhead at around 3:30 in the morning. My car was the only one there. I got in, locked the doors, drove straight to a gas station on Highway 21, and sat under the fluorescent lights until it was daylight. I went back for my tent a week later, in broad daylight with 2 friends. The campsite looked undisturbed except for the collapsed tent, the broken pole, everything else where I'd left it. The footprints in the frost were obviously long gone. I've tried to explain the breathing as echo or acoustics. I've tried to explain the zipper as mechanical failure. I've tried to explain the footprints as another hiker and the tent collapse as a branch falling. But the tent pole didn't fall. It didn't bend. It snapped clean in the middle under pressure. Something pushed on it. Something heavy enough and deliberate enough to break it. I haven't found an explanation that satisfies all 4 things at once. I still camp, but I don't go alone anymore, and I sleep facing the zipper now every single time. This was 6 years ago now. I was 27, freshly divorced after a 3-year marriage that had been failing for at least 2 of those years. I wasn't in a good place. I wasn't sleeping. I'd moved into a studio apartment, and I was doing that thing people do when they're trying to outrun their own thoughts, staying constantly busy, constantly moving. I'd started hiking that summer just to have somewhere to go on weekends. I've thought about this trip probably 1,000 times, not because it was the worst thing that ever happened to me, but because it's the one thing I genuinely cannot explain. And I've tried. It was mid-July. I was doing a 4-day solo loop in the Shawnee National Forest in southern Illinois, the Garden of the God Wilderness area, out past Herod. If you've never been out there, it's a landscape of sandstone formations, dense hardwood forests, and long stretches of trail where you can go a full day without seeing another person. I'd done sections of before, but never the full loop and never alone. Day 1 and day 2 were unremarkable. Hot, humid, beautiful in that heavy midsummer way. I was making decent time, covering about 10 miles per day. I'd found a campsite near a seasonal creek on the second night. Flat rock ground, good elevation, clear view of the sky to the south. I ate, wrote in a small journal I'd brought, watched the stars come out, and was asleep by 10. On the morning of day 3, that's when it started, I was packing up camp when I noticed a figure on the ridgeline to the north, maybe 150 yards out, just above the tree line, standing completely still, watching me, or at least facing me, which felt like the same thing at that distance. I stopped and looked up. The figure didn't move, just standing there on the rock shelf that ran along the ridge. I told myself it was another hiker taking in the view. Totally normal. I went back to packing. When I looked up again, maybe 2 minutes later, they were gone. I thought nothing of it. But that evening, when I set up my second camp about 7 miles further into the loop, the same thing happened. I was setting up my tent, and I looked up at the ridge to the east, and there was a figure, same posture, same stillness, just standing there watching me, too far to see features, too still to be doing anything normal. I told myself it was the same hiker on a parallel trail. Possible, logical, but something felt wrong about the stillness. People on ridgelines move. They look around, shift weight, pull out a phone. This figure just stood. Both times. That night, I had trouble sleeping. I kept the headlamp off and just lay there listening. Around midnight, I heard footsteps on the rock outside my tent. Slow, deliberate, not the random crunch of an animal, measured, human-paced. They circled my camp once. Stopped. Then nothing. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I lay in my sleeping bag for what felt like an hour before I finally turned on the headlamp and looked outside. Empty campsite. Empty ridgeline. Empty everything. The next morning, day 4, supposed to be my last, I was breaking camp at dawn when I heard someone approaching on the trail from behind me. I turned, and a man came around the bend. 50s maybe. Lean. Weathered. He was carrying a day pack and moving easily, like he'd been out here a long time. He smiled and said, "Good morning, Travis." Long way from home. I hadn't told him my name. I hadn't seen him before. There was no trailhead register, no social media, nothing he could have pulled my name from. Travis isn't a common name. He didn't ask me if I was Travis. He just said it, like he already knew. I asked him how he knew my name. He smiled again and said, "You'd be surprised what you learn out here if you pay attention long enough." Then he walked right past me on the trail and disappeared around the next bend. I stood there for a full minute. Then I jogged up the trail to catch him, and he was just gone. No sign of him. The trail ran straight for a quarter mile. He wasn't on it. I checked my map. There were no branching trails for another mile and a half. I started hiking fast. Head down, moving. About 2 miles from the trailhead, I rounded a rock formation, and he was there, standing in the middle of the trail, facing me, not moving. Same smile, same patient expression, like we'd agreed to meet there. I stopped dead. He said, "You should head home now, Travis. You've been out here long enough." I didn't respond. I just walked, fast, right past him, not running, but close. I didn't look back. I heard nothing behind me. No footsteps. No voice. When I finally looked back, maybe 30 seconds later, the trail was empty. Nothing behind me for as far as I could see. I covered the last 2 miles in under 30 minutes. I didn't stop. I hit the parking lot, and my car was there, and I got in and I drove. I didn't shower at the trailhead. I didn't eat anything until I was 40 miles down the road. My hands were shaking the whole drive, not from fear exactly, from something closer to confusion, like my brain couldn't complete a thought. That feeling lasted 3 days. I've told this story to maybe 5 people. Most of them try to explain it. He saw your car registration at the trailhead and followed you. He overheard you on the phone. Someone you know set this up as a prank. I've turned all of those over, and I can't make them fit. My car registration doesn't have my first name on the visible parts. I hadn't been on my phone since day one. No service. Nobody I know was within 200 miles of that trail. What I keep coming back to is how calm he was. Both times. Both encounters. He wasn't threatening. He wasn't aggressive. He was almost gentle. Like he was doing me a favor by telling me to leave. Maybe he was. I've never hiked the Shawnee since. And I never finished writing in that journal. The last entry is from the morning of day 3. The morning I first saw the figure on the ridge. I don't know why I stopped writing. I don't remember deciding to. I found the journal last year in a box. Read it front to back. The last line I wrote was, "Saw someone on the ridge watching camp. Probably nothing. Probably." I was 31 when this happened. My wife and I were in that window before we had kids. That last stretch of real freedom where you can still pack up a bag on a Friday night and be in the backcountry by Saturday morning. We had a group of people we did that with regularly. Good people, experienced hikers. Nobody who spooked easily. I want to be up front. We've all talked about this trip many times over the years. None of us agree on every detail. But there are 4 specific things, that every single one of us remembers the same way. Those are the 4 things I can't explain. There were 5 of us. Me, my wife Dana, our friends Rob and Carrie, and a guy named Fletcher who'd grown up hiking the Cascades and knew the area better than any of us. We were doing a 3-night trip in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest in southwest Washington. A loop trail that took us through old-growth timber, above the tree line on day 2, and back down through a long river valley on day 3. We went in early September. Weather was ideal, clear days, cold nights, no rain in the forecast. We were on the trail by 7 Saturday morning, and covered about 9 miles before setting up camp on a wide bench above the Lewis River. Old-growth Douglas firs above us, the river sound below. Fire ring already in place from previous campers. We ate well. We stayed up late. It was easy, comfortable. The way those trips are when everyone knows each other and nobody's trying too hard. The strange part started on night 2, about 11 miles deeper into the loop. We'd set up camp in a small clearing surrounded by dense forest on all sides. No view of the sky except directly above. The trees were enormous, old growth, 8 and 10 feet in diameter. The kind of forest that makes you feel like you're being watched just by existing inside it. Around 10 at night, Fletcher held up his hand in the middle of a sentence and said, "Do you hear that?" We all went quiet. A sound was coming from the tree line to the north. Rhythmic, low, like a stick being dragged slowly across a hard surface. A hollow wooden sound. Repeating at perfectly even intervals, every 4 or 5 seconds. Knock, pause, knock, pause. Fletcher said it was probably a woodpecker or a branch loose in the wind, but the wind wasn't blowing, and woodpeckers don't knock at night, and the spacing was too even, too deliberate. For anything random, we listened for about 10 minutes. The sound didn't stop. It didn't get closer. Just continued, perfectly paced. From somewhere inside the dark tree line, we went to our tents. The sound continued for at least an hour before I finally stopped being able to hear it over the wind that came up around midnight. The second thing happened in the night. Dana woke me up. She had her hand on my arm, and she wasn't speaking, just squeezing. I came awake fast. Something was walking around our campsite, not through it. Around it, circling. The footsteps were heavy, heavier than a deer, slower than a bear moving through brush. They moved deliberately around the perimeter of our camp, maybe 20 feet out, at a pace that was almost casual, like it wasn't trying to be quiet, like it didn't feel the need to. I heard Rob's tent zipper move. His headlamp came on, the light visible through the canvas. The footsteps stopped the instant the light appeared. Total silence. Then, after maybe 30 seconds of nothing, they continued from exactly where they had stopped. Same pace, same circuit. I unzipped our tent and shone my light out. Nothing. Trees. Dark. Empty ground. Fletcher came out of his tent with his light too. We swept the whole clearing. Rob came out. All three of us standing there in the cold with our headlamps while the women stayed in their tents. Nothing visible. No eyes reflecting the light. No sound anymore. Just forest. We went back inside. 30 seconds later, the footsteps again. We didn't come back out. We lay there and listened to something walk circuits around our camp for the next hour and a half until it either left or stopped. The third thing, and this one bothers me most, we found in the morning, around the campsite, in the soft soil at the edge of the clearing, there were no tracks, no prints at all. The ground was soft enough. We'd left clear boot prints walking the day before. But where the circling had been, where we'd heard something heavy moving just 20 feet from our tents, there was nothing. Unmarked ground. Fletcher said he'd heard of people hoaxing campsites, moving through dry leaves to avoid tracks, staying on root systems. He said it the way you say something when you're trying hard not to believe the alternative. We ate breakfast quickly, packed quietly. Nobody said much. We were maybe 40 minutes down the trail when we heard it behind us, a sound from back toward the campsite, the direction we'd come from, like something large moving through the canopy above the trail, not on the ground, above, the creak of heavy branches, the sound of something displacing weight up in the old growth. We stopped. It stopped. We walked. It moved again, keeping pace. In the canopy, above us, Fletcher said, "Don't stop, just keep walking. Normal pace." We did, for maybe 3 minutes. Something moved to the canopy at the same speed we were moving on the trail below. Then it just didn't anymore. We all heard it cease. The forest went quiet in a specific, total way that felt like a hell breath. Carrie said, "Is it still up there?" Nobody answered. We walked faster after that. We covered the remaining 8 miles in about 4 hours. Nobody suggested stopping for lunch. We ate while walking. Fletcher set a pace that would have been uncomfortable under normal circumstances, and nobody complained. The trail out was silent. No birds for the first mile or two, which Fletcher noted quietly. He said birds go quiet when something big is moving through an area. He didn't elaborate on what kind of big. We hit the trailhead at 2 in the afternoon, loaded the cars, drove separately to a diner on Highway 14, and sat in a vinyl booth and drank bad coffee and barely spoke. Fletcher finally said, "I've done that trail 4 times. I don't know what that was." We left it there. It's been 9 years. Rob and Carrie moved to Oregon. Fletcher still hikes, but he hasn't been back to that loop, and he's never said why. Dana and I have talked about it maybe once a year, usually after some other camping trip reminds us of it in some small way, the way a forest sounds a certain night, the particular rhythm of wind, in old growth. The 4 things nobody in our group disputes: the rhythmic knocking, the circling footsteps, the absence of tracks. The canopy sounds on the trail out. I've read enough about that region to know there are explanations people reach for. I've read about the hoaxers and the sound-carrying qualities of old-growth forest and the way black bears move. I've sat with all of it. What I keep coming back to is the tracks, or the absence of them, because sound can travel in strange ways, and bears do sometimes move at night, and branches do fall from old trees. But something heavy walked a complete perimeter around 5 sleeping people for an hour and a half, and the ground where it walked showed nothing. I don't have a name for what does that. I'm not sure I want one.